Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I'm in a good mood because I just got some routine blood tests back and it turns out I am chock full of estrogen. Here's everything that I read in December. As always, almost everything on this list has its own dedicated video, so if you want to find out more, go watch those. But I really want to start with Iron Widow by Shiran J. Zhao. And the reason being that this was part of a 3-book review video thing that I did, where I talked about 2 other books in this stack that I'll get to in a second. But I want to start here because I need to echo just how much I adore this book. Iron Widow is a very special kind of fiction. This is a young adult science fiction novel. That's the first thing you'll notice about it. But it's also a book that is heavily inspired by Chinese history. The protagonist is called Wu Zetian. The real Wu Zetian was the only ever empress of China. And this book is loosely based on her life, but it is also a Pacific Rim-esque mecha science fiction, pseudo-fantasy, wonderful alien fighting thing. But then you dig a little deeper and you see all of the feminist themes that this book has to offer. And the feminist philosophy that this book takes on is a very, very smart one, in the sense that it reminds you that feminism is not just about women's rights. It picks apart the patriarchy in so many clever ways and from so many different angles. It reminds us that patriarchy and imperialism are all wrapped up together. It's a book that attacks and questions the status quo from multiple different angles. You could say that one of those angles is feminism, another is anti-imperialism, and another is about class divides. But honestly, they're all one and the same, as you can see through the incredible narrative of this book. The way that our protagonist and her arc is written, the way that the world is designed and the things that it echoes, the ways in which character interactions happen, the ways in which the story unfolds, the ways in which we learn about the background and lore of this world, it all serves to show us that patriarchy, imperialism, supremacy, all of these things are one and the same, or at least symptomatic of each other and overlap with each other again and again and again. This is an anti-imperialist novel, it's also a beautifully feminist novel, and it's hard to see where one of those elements ends and the other begins, because it's all about the fight for individual freedoms, for the freedoms of minority groups, and even bigger than that. This is an incredible piece of young adult science fiction that explores queerness and polyamory, that looks at the effects of disability. Our protagonist has had her feet bound and is therefore disabled. It explores Chinese history in really exciting ways and turns that into something very exciting within the genre of science fiction. I could talk about this book for years. If you haven't read Iron Widow, I don't know how to sell it anymore. Whether or not you enjoy young adult fiction, whether or not you enjoy Chinese history, whether or not you enjoy science fiction, this is an important, a vital feminist and anti-imperialist novel that you have to check out. Okay, take a breath, got very excited. Here's A Christmas Carol. I try to reread A Christmas Carol every Christmas Eve if possible. If I remember to, if I have a copy on me, blah blah blah. I've definitely read it quite a few times at this point, and after making a video on it, I also went to Edinburgh and I watched A Muppet Christmas Carol in the cinema with some friends. I've never seen that film at the cinema before. It was super duper cheap, it was a lovely time, and it hit me even harder than it usually does. Partially because, as I said before, I'm now full of estrogen, and partly because I saw it on the big screen, and things hit harder in the cinema. It was a really, really lovely experience, and it reminded me that A Muppet Christmas Carol really is a flawless film. Michael Caine is amazing in it. The music is a little bit front-loaded. The first 2 or 3 tracks in that musical are incredible, and then the last few don't hit as hard. But for the most part, it's perfect. And then I also did a dedicated video on the book itself and my weird relationship to this story, the ways in which I was first exposed to the story of A Christmas Carol and how it's gone on to affect my life since then. I appreciate the message of A Christmas Carol very, very much, and the message comes through best, arguably, in A Muppet Christmas Carol. But what I love about Dickens's original story is his writing and his world building. This is a terrifying story in places. Some of the ghostly moments in it are really, really really chilling. As I mentioned in my video, there are some horrific scenes in here. And then there's the comedy and the wit and Dickens's wonderfully playful language, the names that he gives his characters, the events that we watch unfold. It's so visual. This book transports you to a very tactile world. Everything in it you can see, you can smell, taste, and touch. There are a lot of stories out there that are able to transport the reader into what feels like a whole new physical space, and this is one of them. A Christmas Carol is very, very transportive, and I love it for that. In the lead up to Christmas, my patrons voted on me rereading Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. It was a lovely thing to reread in the Christmas period, and in that video I talked about how this was the book that got me into reading, the book that kind of made me who I am, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. Northern Lights is incredibly important to me, as are the other two books in his Dark Materials. I only reread Northern Lights because I only have so much time, but it remains such a staggering work of humanist fiction. It spoke to me on a very deep level as a teenager. Looking back, the main protagonist, Lyra, definitely helped my egg crack a little bit. If you don't know what that is, it's a trans thing. But it also spoke to me because, as I said in my video, I was a very aggressively anti-religious, anti-theistic punk teenager. Reading it again now as an adult and digging into those themes a little bit more, I was so surprised by the humanism on display and the ways in which Pullman is not just talking about anti-religion here. There are much deeper and more philosophically interesting things on display, because what he's exploring isn't coming from a place of anger and criticism, but rather the positive side of that, curiosity and introspection, and it's absolutely beautiful. Please go and watch my video. I really, really enjoyed making it, and it could do with a few more views. I really wish my videos about comic books and manga performed better than they do, because it's very hard to justify making those videos when I know how many views they're gonna get, how much engagement they're gonna get, how much apathy will surround these videos. But since moving to Scotland, I have slowly gotten back into comic books, which used to be a huge part of my life. And for Christmas, my partner got me this. The Three Jokers. Honestly, this was a really, really exciting thing for me. Just as I had gotten out of reading comics and I started traveling and moving around the world and I couldn't keep collecting them, I read about a moment that happened in Geoff Johns' Justice League comic, where Batman has an opportunity to gain wisdom about anything and everything for a short period of time. And he finally asks the universe this question: who is the Joker? And the thing that grants him this wish, this power, tells him that there are three. This reveal came like 8 or 9 years ago at this point, and it has been teasing the minds of DC and Batman fans ever since. Now, Geoff Johns doesn't write many comics anymore. He's busy in Hollywood writing the screenplays for the big DC films, and not doing a great job as far as I can tell. Like, he wrote the second Wonder Woman film. I didn't see it. I don't know anyone who did. But he returned to comics to write this. The Three Jokers. Answering that question, how can there possibly be three Jokers? It's made up of 3 issues. It's part of DC's Black Label, which means it's not technically canon, but it easily could be folded into the canon by writers in the future if they wanted to. Because everything in here is revelatory but makes perfect sense. It's a really enjoyable story. In it, Batman teams up with Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, and Jason Todd, who was the second Robin and then came back to life and became the Red Hood, and he's a little bit unhinged. Batgirl and Red Hood have both been physically damaged and traumatized by the Joker in the past, very famously. The Joker beat Jason Todd to death and shot Barbara in the spine, and so they have a very vested interest in uncovering this mystery of there existing 3 Jokers. So Batman, Batgirl, and Red Hood set out to uncover this mystery. And it doesn't take long to read. It's a pretty short comic in 3 chapters, and it's really, really satisfying. The thing about a wild mystery like this, the idea that there exist 3 Jokers, is really, really tantalizing. It's genuinely exciting to think about. But the problem with a mystery like that is it eventually has to be solved, and I don't think any solution, any explanation could ever match up to the excitement that you get when you first are presented with that idea. But I think Johns and Jason Fabok as artists did a really, really good job here with that premise, with that setup, and with that resolution. I was happy with it. I wasn't elated, it didn't change my world, but it's exciting. And it does create a kind of status quo at the end. So I do recommend it. In case you missed it, I did a Christmas-themed video about how we read murder mysteries at Christmas time. Maybe you don't, but it's certainly a thing that people do, myself included. I often read Agatha Christie stories around Christmas, and this time I decided to read this. The Three Dahlias by Katie Watson. This, as I said in the video, is kind of a metatextual inversion of the murder mystery because it has all the trappings of the murder mystery. There's kind of a sleuth, or three sleuths. There's a big country house, so the setting is perfect and it's traditional, but it's also a murder mystery about murder mysteries. Our three protagonists are three actresses who have all, or will have all, played a famous sleuth on TV. This sleuth was called Dahlia, and she was created by a writer who is now dead and wrote like 50 plus murder mystery books. She is a stand-in for Agatha Christie. She lived in this big country house, and over the course of her life and after her death, multiple actresses have played her most famous character, Dahlia, a very intelligent, very witty female sleuth. And when they all come together at this author's house to celebrate a new film coming out, things start going wrong, and it doesn't begin with a murder. The murder is like the third thing that happens. It really builds up nice and slowly and draws you into this world. And then eventually, the three actresses who've all played this sleuth all come together to solve a mystery. And eventually that mystery is a murder. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a really fun twist on the murder mystery, and it nods to the fact that over time these things have become kind of metatextual. And also just the sheer popularity of murder mystery books, films and TV shows, and how all of those things overlap as they do here, with actresses who've played a sleuth based on a book are in a book solving a murder mystery. It's tons of fun. One of the last books of 2023 that I read also turned out to be one of the best books of 2023. I did a dedicated video review of In Memoriam by Alice Wynne, and I also featured it on one of my best books of the year lists because, if you haven't watched them, I have two best books of the year lists, as I always do. Books that were translated into English and books that were written in English, and this made that second list. In Memoriam is a queer romance set during World War I. Two posh schoolboys end up in the trenches together. They've been best friends for years and years and years. They're both gay. Neither of them has ever been able to admit his feelings to the other, but when they get to the trenches, they're finally able to. Everything I've just said is in the blurb, and I won't tell you any more. If you want a proper review of it, go check out my video. But In Memoriam is wonderful for its language and its characterization. Those are my two favorite things about this book. The ways in which these two characters and their supporting cast are written is mesmerizing and beautiful. They are some of the most interesting and fleshed out and likable and lovable characters I've read in quite a while, and the way that Wynne writes this book to really sound like something that came out of World War I, or at least that era, is fantastic. The research that she did, the style of writing, the ways in which the characters talk, it's all so emblematic of that time, and it really draws you into this world. You believe in this love story so much. It's wonderful. All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes is a horror novel that I read in the lead up to Christmas because, as I said in my video about it, this is a book that is kind of metaphorically about winter. It's the story of a young trans boy whose brothers both tragically died in the trenches of World War I, but he and his brothers all had an obsession with exploration. And so he sneaks aboard a vessel that is headed for the South Pole. He wants to get to Antarctica, he wants to explore it. And he manages to get there, but a lot goes wrong on the way, and a lot more goes wrong once they arrive in Antarctica. And as I said in my video, this is a book that matches the feeling of experiencing winter time. The build up to Christmas, the excitement, and then after Christmas, January hits, and the way that everything is so dark and cold and dismal, and a lot of people get depressed and feel kind of empty and maybe disappointed. The coldness, the deadness, the lack of colour, the hard ground. Winter has a weird effect on people. It is both exciting and beautiful and positive when it's snowing and when it's Christmas, and then it's also so tragically dismal and sad and lonely and isolating, and all of that feeling is echoed by this book, which is what I think makes it a really, really clever novel. However, in my video I talked about how disappointed I was with it as well. There is a lot about this book that I didn't like, mostly its length. It is way, way, way too long and not enough happens and it doesn't justify its own length, but if you want to know more, check out my video. Then we have two science fiction books that I read in December. The first is Frontier by Grace Curtis, a short sci-fi novel that is clearly inspired by so many different things, which again, I listed off in that video. Things like the 1939 film Stagecoach, things like Star Wars, and Stephen King's Dark Tower, and the Mad Max series of films. All of those things are in here in one way or another. But despite all of these influences, it doesn't feel derivative. It still feels like something fresh, new, and exciting. I really, really enjoyed Frontier. It's a simple premise where climate change has ravaged the Earth, more or less, and most of humanity has fled to the stars, but some remained. Those who remained are kind of a religious cult that worships the Earth itself. Our protagonist is a nameless woman who lands on Earth and is searching for someone, and we watch her slowly move through this world and learn about the strange people who were left on Earth and what they made of the Earth now that it's so dead and deserted. It's short, but it's pretty dense and it's a good time. Finally, but also not finally, we have The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor. This is a sci-fi novel that I felt very conflicted about. Again, I talked about this in my video, but this is a frustrating book. It is both a perfect read and a terrible one. There are so many things about it that I adored and other bits that I really, really disliked and was frustrated by. And that left me feeling kind of meh about the whole thing. But instead of retreading what I said in my video, I do want to just address something that I didn't say that I really wanted to and honestly just forgot to say. Which is that this book sits somewhere between the movie Arrival, one of my favourite sci-fi films, and Adrian Tchaikovsky's novel Children of Time, which honestly, when I think about it, might be my favourite sci-fi novel. I still haven't read Children of Ruin, and there's a bunch of Tchaikovsky books that I haven't gotten to yet, but Children of Time was really special. Children of Time explores a world that's been terraformed, but instead of humans evolving to be the dominant species of the planet, spiders did. And Tchaikovsky uses that concept to explore his own imagination. What would a dominant species of intelligent spiders look like as a civilization? How would they communicate? What would their cities look like? What would their economy be? Loads and loads of fascinating questions, and it's really, really satisfying to see what he imagines. His imagination here is incredible. Children of Time is so exciting, but it is mostly fueled by curiosity and imagination. Arrival, on the other hand, is a very philosophically dense movie about the art, I guess, of communication and the ways in which we see language, the ways in which we see communication, and the ways in which we communicate both through space and time. It's really, really interesting thinking about how communication works through time, because time travel kind of feeds into it, but more importantly, it makes you think about how we communicate with our past. Because we do communicate with the past when we read old books and texts and find art and old bits of writing from the long forgotten, long buried past. Communication through time is a fascinating thing to think about, and Arrival really explores that. And The Mountain in the Sea sits between those two things. It's philosophically dense in places and it's imaginative in places, but it's never as imaginative as Children of Time, and I never found it as philosophically and literarily satisfying as Arrival. It just sits between those two things, and that frustrated me, amongst many other things, so go check out my video because I loved this book and I also hated it. I mentioned a comic earlier, but I also read a manga this month, which I almost forgot about. I finally got around to reading the first volume of Alice in Borderland by Haro Aso. Haro Aso also created Zom 100 Bucket List of the Dead, which is a manga that I absolutely adore. About a guy who is thrilled when the zombie apocalypse arrives because he gets to escape his mundane life, his mundane job, and he feels freed by the apocalypse. Curiously, Alice in Borderland is kind of similar. It's about a teenage boy who hates his life, hates the pressures of school and family, and the fact that he doesn't feel like his life is going to go anywhere once he leaves school. He feels like a failure already, and he loves the idea of escaping all of it, but he can't and he doesn't know how. One day he's out on the town with two friends, and at like 5 a.m. they all witness a random fireworks display, and they wake up in what looks like a post-apocalyptic world in the middle of Tokyo with no people around whatsoever, and they stumble upon a temple where they find out that there are these games being played. And here it starts to feel a little bit like Battle Royale or The Hunger Games or Squid Game, that kind of a thing. They have to engage in these mystery games that are being created by mystery people or beings. These games are deadly, they might die doing them, and they have to try and survive. And when they survive a game, they are given a visa that keeps them alive for a few more days, and within those few days, they have to wander the city and track down another game to play in order to keep surviving. It's relentless, it is powerful stuff, and I really, really enjoyed it. I know that there's also a Japanese live-action adaptation. I think it's on Netflix. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm really enjoying the manga, and as I said, Haro Aso's other manga, Bucket List of the Dead, is also awesome. And just before I let you go, I have also read these 4 horror novels right at the end of the year. First, I read All Hallows by Christopher Golden. Then I read Maggie's Grave by David Sodergren. Then I read The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. And finally, in the last few days of this month, I am reading The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. I got this out of the library because I promised myself I would visit my library more often, and I've done it. I'll be talking about all 4 of these books in an upcoming video. I'm not going to tell you anything about them right now, so just look forward to that. There you go, that is everything that I have read in December. I hope you enjoyed. My next video will be about what I plan to read in January, and the one after that is really, really important, so keep your eye out for that. Subscribe for books.